I mean, she's been like, we're right there, and you're tearing up shit, and we've
Yeah.
told you about that a million. She's hard headed, you know.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
she deserved it. I don't have any regrets about it. Shit.
Okay. Oh.
So we just been kind of with her
So
today,
she's been
like,
avoiding you now.
well, she's not. She doesn't. Zuri's the opposite because she's high maintenance. She comes up to you, wants to cuddle, and it's like, no, no, get away. All right, I'm gonna let Mark in, and then
Okay.
you could do your thing.
Okay.
All right.
It's funny.
In our lifetime we will be free. One day when the light shines we will be free. In our lifetime we will be free. And they can bury us, but they will find out we are seeds. They can bury us, but they will find out we are seeds. I say free Palestine because I know of every massacre we suffered. The Nakba, Sabra, Shatila, and Rafah. My people have died a million times in the struggle. Still they rise from the tide like a rose through the rubble. I see God himself in the eye of a refugee who'd rather die a martyr than live a life under siege. So if I'm not allowed to say from the river to the sea, then from the Rhine to the sea, Palestine will be free. Still they know they can't shake us. $1 billion sword to the neck. Death cannot break us. And every Palestinian refugee holds a key. One day we will return. No matter how long it takes us. Lifetime we will be free. One day when the light shines we will be free. In our lifetime we will be free. And they can bury us, but they will find out we are seeds. I've seen massacres, I'm grateful to be alive. You appreciate life when you survive a genocide. Look in my eyes and tell me what you see. Ran out of tears to cry, right till Palestine is free. Got a problem with a system that doesn't want us exist and turn the city to a prison that's missing living conditions. My mom's calling, she's telling me she kinda scared. I hear the bombs falling, I smell of death up in the air. My uncle lost his children, I lost my cousins. His tears watered the grave to let him know we still love some. Our schools turn to shelters for the rich and poor.
Ooh, hello, greetings. Happy day to you. We hope that you are sincerely doing well. We're glad that you are joining us for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Who else? And this week, our very important topic, Zionist Israel, the lie that keeps giving. Zionist Israel, the lie that keeps giving. We'll be talking about all of the lies that surround the Zionist movement, starting with the myth that Zionism and Judaism are one and the same. They are not. So that's what we will be talking about today. We're glad that you are here to join us, and we give honor and respect and thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Very important to acknowledge that struggle. I have mentioned many times on this program, I teach self-defense classes on Thursday night. And what we're doing with that is all of the people that come and participate, each week we ask a new person to bring an article that we can discuss, trying to institutionalize the concept of political education. And it's been going very well. People bring articles every week. And the person that brought an article last Thursday, this past Thursday, brought an article that was centered on indigenous uh, culture and quoted a lot from John Trudell, who Shakur plays often on the intro to this program. Trudell was an indigenous activist who was one of the national leaders in the American Indian movement. He's made his physical transition. I had the privilege of bodyguarding for him once, and just honoring people like John Trudell, who uh, did their best, I believe, to represent the indigenous struggle with integrity and truth. And so we honor that. And we, of course, honor our African ancestors. We talked last week, dedicating the program to our brother comrade, brother Arimu from Nigeria, who was mysteriously struck down by a hit and run automobile about 2 weeks ago in Nigeria. A very committed and conscious cadre in our revolutionary Pan African struggle. And just looking at the pictures the comrades sent over of his life celebration, there were tons of people there who came out to commemorate him this past week at the ceremony, as there should have been, because he was a warrior for Africa, a warrior for human justice and dignity. And now he is an ancestor. So we are just so honored to have had the opportunity to meet him and work with him some when we were over at home in Africa, and just inspired to continue to do what he would have done, continue to wage the struggle to the best of our abilities. So we just start, as we always do, by just the brief introductions for those that may not be familiar with us, or those that need a reminder of who we are. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored again by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan African political party based in Africa. And our objective is Pan Africanism, defined as one unified socialist Africa. We had within the AAPRP yesterday, we have regions, we have chapter regions, and we have several regions throughout Africa. We have Europe as a region, and we have the Western Hemisphere. So we had our Western Hemisphere meeting last night, and a lot of people attended on a virtual platform. And we had the youth organizers who attended the Pan African Youth Festival in Nguka in Burkina Faso give reports, and very inspiring. It was a Pan African conference with representatives from 30 countries throughout the world, Africa and the diaspora, including the United Snakes of America. And the young organizers were talking about how it was important for them to learn the distinction that everybody that says Pan Africanism is not saying the same thing. And we do our best to reiterate that on this program all the time. Pan Africanism for us is not just Black people unified, quote unquote. It's not just uh, Black people, quote unquote, some nebulous unification across the world without any type of class analysis attached to it. Pan Africanism to us is the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. That's what it is for us. It's a total nation, class, gender analysis of our struggle. So that's just always important to point out. And they had the opportunity, all of our organizers on the ground that participated in that great conference, to push that line, as we often do in the work that we do. That's probably what we are tasked to do more often than anything else. And of course, the strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism was illustrated in that FIPAN conference in Burkina Faso, as we had organizers there on the ground from various Pan-African formations who agree that the objective is one unified socialist Africa, as Kwame Nkrumah outlined in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. We had people participating in Burkina Faso who were AAPRP members, in Niger, from Niger, who were AAPRP members, people from the Democratic Party of Guinea, who is a sibling sister party to the AAPRP, participating, people from the African Party for Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, who are sibling party to the APRP, and so on and so forth. So all of this took place, and these are putting the pieces in place to build a worldwide fighting force that will stand up and walk over the chests of international capitalism and imperialism. And we don't care whether you think it's possible that we'll do that or not. We know that we're going to do it. And if you don't believe it, you'll just wake up one day and we will be walking right over your chest. So that's what our objective is. And this program, Our Ancestors' Voices, is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, the doctor, Shakur Umi. So to get us started, I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. Appreciate you. And apologize, Baba Jamu. I got caught up with those lyrics. My apologies, everyone. Yes, so on that note, continuing to uplift our comrades who are fighting to reclaim, occupy Palestine. I have to say, this is one of my most favorite seminar topics because it bears repeating that there is a very strong, founded and grounded relationship between the African struggle, the Palestinian struggle, even so much that more people are starting to talk and speak using terms and phrases such as Occupy Palestine. It really warms my heart, and it gives me hope that we are coming into the horizon of understanding that this is the only side that we can be on in terms of understanding land reclamation, land ownership being re-earned and taken back. And, you know, part of that conversation includes us really digging into settler colonialism, right? So thinking about what that definition could mean, we have to think about how there is some type of force from one country that invades another country and takes over any part of the country's functionality, meaning the political functionality, the economic functionality, the social functionality, ramifications, mechanisms, anything that falls under those categories of the invaded country, meaning the country that was invaded no longer has the ability to determine or decide political, economic, social mechanisms because the dominant country has now taken over, right? And because of that, that dominant country maintains the control to continue to decide what happens to that invaded country. You know, you could think about Canada, you could think about Australia, you could think about Zimbabwe, the US, Azania, or the colonized term of South Africa, and even the Zionist state of Israel. These are all examples of settler colonies. And again, like, you know, when we think about what is happening with the indigenous people, when we think about what is happening with Palestinian people, when we think about what's happening with Africans, we have to kind of think about what those connections can be. So you all know that, you know, I try my best to bring these lessons in for different young people so that they can see it, especially as it's all connected to health. And I argue very much so that colonization very much contributes to health outcomes. So whether you are super healthy because you have privilege and access, or whether you are not as healthy and more likely to be sick because you don't have as much privilege and access, right? And so I'm always making this argument that those three groups have more in common than we can actually consider if we were to really think about it. In all three cases, you have a group of people that have suffered at the hands of settler colonization. You also have situations where the land has been completely invaded and obtained. And in one case in particular with Africans, we were actually removed from said land. But in both cases, none of those groups have the power that's connected with owning the land. And that's always going to be really important on the grand scheme and on the grand scale of things, because a lot of people will get confused and they'll say things like, Africans weren't all in Africa to begin with. They'll say other things like, indigenous people wanted us to be enslaved, like all kinds of really non-factual and non-evidence based things. But what is factual and what is evidence based is that when you do not control the land that you descend from, and other people have come in and invaded that land, they have come in and taken over, and they are now making decisions that very much impact you. That has everything to do with the public health solutions, but also the public health crises that begin to develop. I always think about how indigenous folks have some of the highest maternal mortality rates, and we don't even talk about it that much because indigenous people have literally been erased out of time. They have literally been erased out of time. Why do you think they suffer from alcoholism? They lost everything and thousands of them were killed. Of course, they're trying to figure out a way to grapple with what has happened to them. So, yes, they probably will be picking up some type of alcoholic beverage at some point. They also have some of the highest suicide rates. Why do you think that is? Like, these are evidence based things that we need to think about, you all. I would argue the same for African people. It's ironic that we have had any of the resilience that we have had with all three of these groups of people because we have been through so much. We have been through so much. And so, yeah, when you don't own your land, there are economic, social, political factors to consider, but also health, also mental health, also the physiological stress that your body goes through. As we know that stress is passed through the placenta biologically, we know that from evidence. So it is very clear that just because this happened to these three groups of people 400, 500 plus years ago, that does not mean that we are not still seeing the effects today. That does not mean that. I encourage you, if you want to make that argument, I will refute it. I promise you I will, because I'm personally just thinking of the enslavement of African people and the sexual experimentation that was done on Anarcha and Betsy and Lucy, and how because of my ancestors, any of us that need to see OBGYNs today have that ability to do so because they were the experiments that gave birth to, pun intended, the obstetrics gynecological medicine subdivision. It's because of their experimentations. And if you don't need to see an OBGYN, they still allowed you to benefit from that because you came from someone who needed to see an OBGYN. So we owe them everything, you all. We owe them everything. But we don't even acknowledge what they went through. And we don't acknowledge what their heirs went through. And we don't acknowledge how their lack of consent and sexual experimentation then is still very much contributing to how African women are perceived in health spaces today, how marginalized African people are perceived in health spaces today. It has everything to do with land ownership, you all. We have got to acknowledge that. We have got to accept it. We have got to study it and understand it. We cannot just say, oh, people are in the positions they're in because of racism. It's not that simple. I wish it were. But racism doesn't exist by itself. It was given birth to from colonialism and white supremacy. Like, we have got to name it, we've got to call it, and we've got to acknowledge it. It cannot stand by itself. So these are some things to think about, especially when you think about how the settler colonies have continued in some cases, and I'm sure Baba Ajamu will talk about that later in the presentation, but even thinking about examples like Burkina Faso and how they were colonized by the French, right? And so now there's even this idea of neocolonialism, right? Where we need to even kind of think about how they may not physically have a presence there anymore, but clearly French languages are spoken all throughout Burkina Faso, right? All throughout Senegal, French languages are spoken. French banks are established on African soil, right? And they get to tax African people because they have some connection to how the control of the land is still being determined even today. Next slide, please. So we can't say, oh, well, they're not connected. No, they're very much connected. They're like they're very much connected, and we don't want to insult people when we say that, because the truth is we know that they're connected. So let's just name it and let's call it. Let's save time. Let's save face. Let's not waste time lying, okay? And let's just be honest about that. Remove the emotion from it and just look at the facts. Quite literally, look at the facts. Like, this is where we are. Colonizers are never going to admit that they're colonizers. Why would they? It benefits them way too much. It benefits them way too much to admit that, because then they would have to also admit that the reason they're stealing these resources, the reason they're stealing this land, the reason they're stealing people in some cases, is because they don't have the resources or the people or the land, excuse me, to continue to advance their agenda. This is why they have the dominant power to be able to take it from someone else. This is why. That's all connected, right? And so, we can think about several different cases. Like I said, you can look at Australia, you can look at Canada, the US, Azania. We can even think about occupied Palestine. And it's never that those lands were stolen and are still occupied and controlled by thieves. That's the actual truth, but that's not what rhetorical media will tell you. That's not what capitalist media will tell you. That is not what typical conversations that you're hearing about are being had or facilitated in that manner. Nobody is going to admit those things. Nobody is going to admit those things, just like they're not going to admit that in this society, in the US, we celebrate and we honor people who have caused harm and who have developed victims. We give them parks. We name schools after them, which is insane to me that we would send children to a building that was named after someone who violated people sexually. That is insane to me, but we do it every day. Okay. We name community centers after these people, right? And I don't understand why we do that, but then we shame the people who are fighting against these same folks. We say that they are militant and criminals. We say that they're violent. We say, that they belong in prison. And some of them are in prison. And I'm speaking to our political prisoners at this point. So it is very much a backward society. It is very much a backward society. But yet, here's the reality: the truth is hidden. Okay. That's why we're going to have to take responsibility and dig deeper to find it. This is why we always say that you have to increase your political education. To take it a step further, we also say that if you are interested in increasing your political education and you are an African, then we strongly encourage you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have a very concrete political education process that is separate from the larger committee that we have access to, where they offer seminars and things like that that help us increase our PE. But on top of that, we have a work study process, because a lot of these issues we are not knowledgeable enough to understand and articulate, and therefore develop solutions to the current problems. This is why we need to do our research, we need to educate ourselves, and we need to go back and read from trusted sources, you all. You can't just read from anybody, because we just told you that the system lies to you constantly. So you got to be selective on who you receive information from. You have to learn to be critical. You have to learn to dissect the information to make sure by cross fact checking that it is accurate and correct. You have every responsibility to do that. You cannot trust that any information given to you is valid. Even the seminar today, you should be cross fact checking it. You should be doing that, because this is how you develop your brain muscles. And more importantly, this is how you affirm that you have the ability to know that you're receiving information from a trusted source, which means you're more likely to relax, because now you know that this information makes sense because it's legit, versus having to wonder whether or not the people are actually being honest with you. Like, there's so much to be said with that. The colonial narrative remains that the colonized need civilizing, and that the colonized are better off with their colonial masters in charge of their lives. This is what people are saying, you all, that colonization is a benefit for people. This is what people are saying, that people who are colonized have every reason to give thanks to the oppressors that took over their land, that took over their language, that took over their will, that took over their clothing, that took over the foods that they ate, told them they had to start eating new foods that had nothing to do with their culture, shamed them and beat them if they still spoke their native language, did not allow them to name their children traditional names that connected with their culture because that was going against the colonization. And instead, it was encouraged that we assimilate and that we fall in line with the new forced culture that has been put upon us. You can't tell me that there are not extreme ramifications from that. You cannot tell me that. And I know you don't believe that. I know you don't, because that's absurd. That is absolutely absurd. If it weren't absurd, then why are there countless examples of people who are resisting all over the world because they are sick and tired of being sick and tired? Come on. Like, we got to think a little bit deeper about this. These colonizers in the picture here invaded Azania. Okay. They walked in and started taking over when that had nothing to do with their land. And because they invaded it now, and again, the colonized term for Azania is South Africa, but that is not the actual name of the country. So please do your research and understand that Azania is the correct name. So they colonized, they colonized and invaded Azania. And now that the Africans are fighting for justice, this is exactly what I'm talking about, fighting for justice after 500 years, they have fled to the US. So these Europeans have now left Azania and now they have come here to the US claiming you all to be victims. How you going to be a victim when you cause somebody else to be a victim? Because you walked into their space and said, yeah, you got to get up out of here. Again, backwards. But if we don't know the tales and the stories and the history and the herstory and the theirstory, then that means we will allow anybody to tell us anything. One of the most favorite birds that I have, the Sankofa bird, and the traditional African story is all about understanding that the bird is facing forward, but the head and the beak are backwards. And the saying goes that the bird is facing forward because the bird understands we need to move forward for progress to occur. But the bird's head is facing backwards because the saying also goes that in order for us to move forward, we have got to understand what we have come across behind us. We've got to learn from the mistakes, from the experiences, from the challenges that we had, so we do not repeat them. But more importantly, because there are lessons there that can help make us stronger. So the bottom line is, if you have somebody coming into your space telling you that you need to get up out of there and you need to learn a new language and you need to start wearing new clothes and you need to have different religious practices and different beliefs and you have to start changing everything about who you are and erasing your entire identity. And then when I have the nerve to fight back and tell you I don't want to do that, that's not okay with me, then you go to another country and say, oh my gosh, they pushed us out. And we celebrate that? Why? Why do we celebrate that? We've got to dig deeper into that, you all. The very reason that Sankofa exists is because we have to take responsibility for the information that we want to have. And so as I prepare to close, we have to think a lot more deeply about that, you all. We have every responsibility to do that. We've already given you the seminar on Indigenous Peoples Day. We know that November is around the corner. We want to encourage you to continue decolonizing the language. You should challenge yourself to see how many times in the month of November you cannot use the traditional term for the holiday, and instead what undecolonized terms can you use instead? How many times can you say unthanksgiving? How does it feel when you say it? Is it something that you could possibly get used to? Is it possible that you could say it at least once per day for the entire month of November as you continue to pay homage to the indigenous people? Occupy Palestine is another term you can try to incorporate, right? What does that look like for you? Like, these are the steps, you all. You might not be ready to join an organization, but maybe for December or your New Year's resolution, that's something to consider, because now is the time to organize. We can be discouraged all we want, but we should be organizing so that we can address our discouragement, because the people are winning. And if nothing else, the delegations that Baba Ajamu talked about should show you that that work is continuously being done. People are not stopping you all. And we have the right to move with them and continue to hold ourselves accountable for that. We got this.
Ashe, obrigada, asante sana. And I think a big part of this anti-colonial work is that we have to recognize what the capitalist imperialist system does, you all, is it really relies on us seeing our interests as the same as its interests. So Shakur, we got to be careful. Like we can't say we did. We didn't do any of that. We didn't do any of that. We have nothing to do with that. Like we don't have anything to do with what these people are doing. We're fighting against what they're doing. So, those of you out there, when you say that, like we bombed Iran, like you would, if I put a gun to your head, you wouldn't know how to find a bomb that can reach Iran. So why are you claiming responsibility for that? That money spent for those bombs that bombed Iran take resources out of your pocket. Why are you claiming that? Like you shouldn't do that. That's the first step in the anti-colonial fight, is to recognize that your interests are not, you're not a part of the colonizers' interests. Your interests have nothing to do with their interests. So let's get into this Zionist movement, right? Kwame Ture said once that capitalism makes what should be obviously criminal seem normal while making justice seem strange. What should be capitalism makes what should be normal seem strange and makes what should be strange seem normal. And I give the example of, I was talking to some high school students and I told them, if I was, someone your age, and I went out on your quad today, and I had a sound system, and I started talking about we need to build programs to fight against police terrorism, to build an anti-colonial movement, to end poverty, to end houselessness. I told them 99.9% of you would walk by me like you didn't even see me or hear me, even though everything I would be talking about should be normal. But because this capitalist imperialist system makes wanting to stand up for humanity strange, you would feel like it was strange to listen to me and talk to me, so you would ignore me. Whereas if I took that same sound system out on your quad at your high school and I had music and I was talking about the B's and the H's and the N words, a lot of you would run up to the stage to move to the beat and try to imitate what I was saying. Whereas that's really strange, but it's been normalized. So what really is strange is ignoring the fight for justice and human advancement, but that's been seeing that struggle as strange has been normalized, and what should be strange, like dehumanizing ourselves, that's been normalized. So that's what Kwame was talking about. And, Zionist logic is a great, great example of this, because the supporters of the Zionist movement, like they use the Holocaust. The Holocaust happened during World War II, of course, in Nazi Germany. The Third Reich was in power there, and they murdered approximately 12 million people. They were primarily most of those folks, at least half of them, were documented to be people who were identified as Jewish people. The other 6 million were Arabs, were Africans, were other people who were deemed non-essential by the racist Nazi regime, right? People who had physical challenges. All of those folks were the people that they annihilated in Nazi Germany. And so what the Zionist movement has done, though, is it has used the Holocaust to cover for its 100-year effort, 140-year effort now, or 30-year effort now, to steal land from the Palestinian people. And this is what Malcolm X was talking about when he gave his speech in 1964 in Egypt. And he talked about the Zionist argument to occupy Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history. What Malcolm was talking about is that Zionism is a political movement that has nothing to do with religion. that started in 1897 with a conference in Basel, Switzerland. That's where the Zionist movement had its organizational origins. It had nothing to do with religion. The person who convened that conference was a man named Theodor Herzl, who, in his own memoir, you should read it, I have, um, stated unequivocally that he was an atheist. And an atheist means you absolutely do not believe in God. So you cannot, if you understand that, claim that the Zionist movement was rooted in faith. It was always about building a political movement that would generate political power. And the way that these people recognized that they could do that was by identifying a country that they could build up that could be an international ally to international imperialism. And they would use faith as cover to justify their illegal occupation of those lands. So Palestine was not even the original country that they chose. They had a number of countries they chose. One of them was Uganda. The reason why they didn't choose Uganda for the Zionist state of Israel is because it was landlocked. If you look at a map, now Uganda's in the center. It's Central Africa, and there's no major waterways there. They wanted that, and then they chose Venezuela, but there were other problems. They chose some other places, but they decided on occupied Palestine because one of the main reasons, because that's one of the major shipping routes in the world. And they knew that if they could establish a state there, they would certainly gain the support of international imperialism, who wanted to have a strong ally in that region, in the Mediterranean region. And that's why when you look at the main shipping routes from east to west, have been occupied by settler colonial regimes. In the Mediterranean region, it's of course been the Zionist state of Israel. In the Cape region, it of course has been the apartheid, racist state of Azania, South Africa. So that's why they wanted to do that, is to establish that illegal regime. Zionism, the movement that started in 1897 in Switzerland, has absolutely nothing to do with the Judaic religion, the Judaic faith. And they will call us anti-Semitic for saying what I just said, but the faith of Judaism has its roots in Africa. Even if you look at your Bible, even if you look at Old Testament Bible, and you look at the book of Genesis, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 13, rather, it talks about the establishment of, Adam and Eve and that story. And it starts, the first country mentioned in the Bible is Ethiopia. If you have an Old Testament, it'll be identified as Cush with a K or a C. And if you look up the meaning of Cush, that is the land of dark people. So that's what it is. That's where the dreadlocked, so-called dreadlocked hairstyle comes from, which is talked about in the book of Revelations in the Bible, where it talks about Jesus having hair of wool. That's why people lock their hair, because of this historical origin of, those regions in Africa. So we're not anti-Semitic. I mean, the definition in the Bible, even your Colonial Webster's dictionary of Semite is an Asian, African, Arab people. So that's just not serious to call us anti-Semitic. We're making the point that Zionism and Judaism are two completely different things. There are many Zionists who are atheists and have no faith in religion. There are many Jews who are anti-Zionist. Many Jews are anti-Zionist. So you have to understand that to start, that Zionism and Judaism are not the same, because the Zionist movement has worked very hard over the last 130 years to convince you that they're the same thing. And as a result, any criticism against the Zionist state of Israel, they will label you anti-Semitic. So these Ashkenazi, which means European Jews, label any criticism against the illegal state of Israel as anti-Semitic. And as I mentioned, when Semites are colonized people, without question. If you know people, you should ask them, do your own research. They say, well, I'm Jewish. That's my ethnicity. There is no Jewish ethnicity. That's a lie. That's another lie. There's no such thing as a Jewish ethnicity. Just like there's no such thing as a Muslim ethnicity, there's no such thing as a Christian ethnicity. These are faiths that have people from all ethnicities that belong to them. And if you don't believe that, because I know that that goes against everything you've been taught, all you have to do is when you encounter Ashkenazi Jews, just ask them, where is your family history from? They can't tell you, well, it's from Jewish land. There's no such thing. They have to tell you. If you ask them, they will tell you, well, my family's from Russia. My family's from Poland. They're from Romania. They're from Ukraine. That's their ethnicity, you all. Their evidence is right there for all to see. All you have to do is dig and do the proper research. But what they've done is convince you that Judaism is an ethnicity. And if you believe that, then that gives them the cover to justify claiming occupied Palestine as their very own. But we're not confused. We're not going for that. That's not true. This region of the world that we're talking about, where Palestine is, all the people in that region are of color. The people in North Africa are Arab and African. The people in the Middle East are primarily Arab. There's no European country in that entire region. If you go to South Asia countries, like you start with Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan, and you go that direction east, none of those countries are European countries. The only country in that entire region that's dominated by Europeans is the Zionist state of Israel. And it has received the support that it receives for decades, primarily from the United States of America, because it serves as a reliable ally to international imperialism in the Middle East. It's the only one that they feel like they can rely on, and that's probably true. So you have to understand the politics of this and take it out of the emotional realm, out of the ignorance realm, out of the propaganda realm, and understand the argument. Like, I've argued with these people for 40 years. They don't even want to see me coming anymore. They don't want to see nobody in the APRP coming, because we have studied this question and we understand it, and we can turn them on their heads in seconds. Some woman was asking, she was asking me, well, the Jews were persecuted in Egypt. And I said, well, how is that so? When were you talking about? She said in 1200 BC, the Jews were persecuted in Egypt. I'm like, well, what is your evidence that they were Jews they were persecuted there? She didn't have any evidence. I said, well, there were Africans persecuted in Egypt, or Kemet, which is what it was really called, in 1200 BC. Some of them were Jews, some of them were Christians, some of them were Muslims, some of them were atheists, some of them practiced traditional African forms of faith. That's who was oppressed. That's who built the pyramids. That's who did all of that work. It wasn't white people in that region in 1200 BC. I told her, you got to be out of your goddamn mind if you want to try to run that past me. I'm not going for that. I know the history. She couldn't refute it. So this is why Shakura is so correct when she talks about political education. And it's also important, we're talking about all these damn Zionist lies. It's also important to understand Africa is at the center of Zionist lies. There's so many Africans that are like, why are we talking about Palestine? That has nothing to do with that. Anybody that talks like that, they're telling me right away they're not involved in any serious organized struggle to liberate our people. They're just running bumping their gums. That's all they're doing. Anytime they talk like that, they know that. Because anybody that's involved in organizing work to liberate our people, you learn immediately the role that Africa and African people play in bolstering up the Zionist state of Israel. So it's in our interest to see Zionism defeated. If that reason, for nothing else, the humanism for the Palestinian people, but even if you don't want to acknowledge that, even just for African people to get that yoke, that thing off of our back, then it's important to understand the role of Zionism. The Zionist movement 100 years ago, they formed an alliance. It was with the apartheid, the racist segregation, apartheid, European settler colonial government in Azania, known as South Africa then. It was the Zionist movement and Britain. And they formed this alliance that led to the Balfour Declaration. Lord Balfour was the leader in Britain at that time in 1917. And so Britain colonized Palestine. It was called, look at an old map before 1948, when the Zionist state of Israel was established. It won't be called Israel, it'll be called Palestine. The evidence is all around you, all around you. So for when they tell you, well, it's always been our land because the Bible said, the Bible thousands of years ago, I just told you, that was talking about African people. It wasn't talking about these white people running around here today, these Ashkenazi. It wasn't talking about them. But if you look at a map before 1948, you'll see it for yourself. It's on there. And so this Balfour Declaration essentially said that the lands belong to the quote unquote Jewish people. Well, really, what they were saying is white people move in, Arabs move out. And so that's when the settlements begin to happen, where European people all over the world, who Ashkenazi Jews, begin to move to Palestine and settle there. That's where the population began to grow. And so from 1917 up through World War II, the effort was made to increase the population of European Ashkenazis into Palestine. And the Zionist movement proliferated that effort by negotiating with these anti-Jewish states in Europe. You know, Europe has a long history of religious intolerance. That's why these crackers are here today. They run this country because of religious intolerance. Even your backward ass school training taught you that. So that's why the pilgrims came here. You're going to hear it all next month. It's told backward ass nonsense. That's why they came here, is because of religious intolerance. Europe's history is full of that, right? So what happened there is that they came to these folks settled in that region, and the Zionist movement worked with, hear me when I say this, worked with these countries, Poland. They worked with Poland, they worked with Romania, they worked with Russia, they worked with Ukraine, they worked with all of these regions of Europe, including the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. And what they did is they encouraged these people, like, you don't want these people in your country, because yeah, there's no question that Jews, even Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, have always been exploited and oppressed. No one is denying that. In Europe, they've always been exploited and oppressed. So the Zionist movement manipulated that to negotiate with these governments and say, you don't want these people. We're building a country where they can go. So we want to encourage you to do whatever you can to drive them towards this new state of Israel that we're establishing. And there's so much documentation of what I'm telling you right now. Lenny Brenner, who's an anti-Zionist Jewish professor, wrote a book called Zionism in the Age of Dictators. Zionism in the Age of Dictators. Lenny Brenner, you should read that book. He outlines in great detail what I just explained about the Zionist movement negotiating with the Third Reich and Nazi Germany and all those countries in Europe to drive these Ashkenazi European Jews to the establishment of the State of Israel, which happened in 1948. But going back to 1917, this axis between Britain, apartheid, racist apartheid, Azania, South Africa, and the Zionist movement, they needed mechanisms to finance the development of this state of Israel, which of course didn't happen until decades later. And one of the most important things that came from that alliance is the racists in apartheid were exploiting the diamond industry. The De Beers Company, which was founded by that old cracker Cecil Rhodes. You run around here today, I'm a Rhodes scholar. That he was nothing but a racist colonizer. I don't know why you would even want to claim that. But that's what they did. They established De Beers, and they've been stealing the diamonds out of Africa ever since, for 100 years. In fact, there's some of the richest people in Africa today, the Oppenheimer family, Europeans, from the theft of diamonds that they've gotten through their De Beers Corporation. So what happened there is they began to establish the shipment of these mined diamonds to the Zionist state of Israel to be polished there. And even today in 2025, polished diamonds serve as one of the main economic foundations of the Zionist state of Israel's economy. You can look this, these are things you can document. He on there lying. Okay, well then reopen a goddamn book and read it for yourself. This is easy information to document. And the Zionist state of Israel produces up to 40% of the polished diamonds in the world. You know that wedding, that engagement ring you bought, that wedding ring you bought, that chain you bought, that bracelet you bought, that watch you bought, all of them were produced from the blood of our people in Africa and through the exploitation in the blood of the Palestinian people through the Zionist state of Israel. That's why we're anti-Zionist, because it's anti-human against the Palestinian people, but it's also been built on the exploitation of our mother Africa and our people. So shut your goddamn mouth telling us, well, that's not our struggle. You sound like a damn fool when you say that. And you're telling us right then that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. So this is what's happening. And as a result of that, Africans in Africa have always, seeing this exploitation, been against the Zionist movement. So there are many examples throughout Africa where African liberation movements were very anti-Zionist and provided support to Palestinian commando groups to stage their attacks against the Zionist state of Israel. When the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, was founded in 1964 by people like Yasser Arafat, they were able to rely on many regions in Africa to support their efforts. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF, in East Africa allowed the PLO to stage operations against the Zionist state of Israel. Of course, countries in North Africa, like Libya, under Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan Jamahiriya, they allowed the most radical Palestinian elements of the PLO to stage attacks against the Zionist state of Israel. They did that, and even like in Uganda, heard of the movie Entebbe? There was a one in the 70s called Battle at Entebbe or some nonsense like that, and then they redid it in 2018. Entebbe is a town in Uganda. Milton Obote, who was the president of Uganda at that time, allowed for Palestinian commandos to stage attacks against the Zionist state of Israel. And this is the reason why the Zionists began to see the necessity to engage in counterinsurgency efforts all throughout the African continent. And they did that. This picture on the screen here is Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, which is the military for the Zionist state of Israel, training Congolese military personnel in Kinshasa, in the Congo. And they've done that there, training them in Krav Maga, the fighting mechanism that they use, training them in weapons manufacturing. And the reason why they're doing it all over Africa. That's why today Ethiopia, they've been arming Ethiopia with millions of dollars of armaments every year between the Zionist state of Israel and the United States of America to ensure that Ethiopia would serve as the imperialist police force in East Africa to protect the interests of international imperialism, particularly that of the Zionist state of Israel. That's why they're backing this backward-ass neo-colonial president in Ethiopia so hard. That's the reason why they do that. And so that's why we got to understand that. And it's also the reason why Zionism has attacked African radical leaders even here in the U.S. Because even if you're too dumb to recognize our connection to Africa, they're not. So they know when Louis Farrakhan was younger and was, one of the primary voices against the Zionist movement, that they had to attack him. They know when the Anti-Defamation League, who is supposed to be an battle anti-Semitism, their Zionist organization here, Anti-Defamation League, we call them the African Deaf League, ADL. They published a pamphlet, look it up, Black demagogues and hate teachers. Look it up. 1991, they produced it. And they called the All African People's Revolutionary Party the most militant anti Zionist organization in the US. They couldn't even say we were anti Judaic because they know that wasn't true. We're against them, the Zionist movement, and they had to acknowledge that. And we took it as a badge of honor and still do. So we have to sift through all this to get to the truth because their lies are so, all encompassing. I know it's hard for even a lot of you who are seeking truth to see through it. They got you on this lie that okay, they're an ethnicity, so you can't say that they can't if they're ethnicity and that's their ethnic home, you can't say that they don't have a right to return there. They got you on that one. They got you on this lie that Hamas is the terrorist group and they captured all these people on October 7th, 2023, and that's the problem. Look, Shakura, if you tuned in early enough, Shakura was playing the artist that was singing, and most of you missed it because you probably don't know the history. But the artist made a statement in the song about Shabra and Shatila. You should look this stuff up. Shabra and Shatila was a refugee camp in Lebanon for Palestinians. And in 1982, the Zionist state of Israel armed and trained the Phalange militia, who was loyal to the Zionist state of Israel. The Phalange militia existed in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley. It's a desert region in southern Lebanon. And the Phalange militia went into the Shabra and Shatila camp and slaughtered hundreds of Palestinian women, men, and children, and non-gender conforming people, everybody, the dogs, they killed everybody there. And they've done that consistently, you all. So you're talking to me about 5 or 6 white people on October 7th, 2023. Hey, even if they took them, they are constantly losing people. They have a right to stand up and defend their people whatever way they can because they're under siege. They've been under siege. That was almost that was 45 years ago. Even 2 days before 9/11 in the town of Jina in occupied in the Middle East there were 500 Palestinians who were murdered by the Zionist state of Israel. They're always doing this, but they're not going to tell you that. They're going to highlight it when it happens to the white people. So yeah, the many of you out here, that's terrorism is wrong no matter who's committing it. Look, there's only one terrorist. It's the international capitalist and imperialist network. So the problem isn't Hamas, and the conflict didn't start in October of 2023. The struggle for Palestinian self determination, just like our African self determination struggle, just like the struggle of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, all of this started with the onslaught of capitalist development, colonialism that fueled it, and its retired expansion of imperialism to build up the wealth of the Western empire. And any struggle for justice for humanity has to require that work be done from that anti-imperialist framework. From that anti-imperialist framework. So it is impossible to be an African revolutionary and believe that, well, we are going to get free just focusing on quote unquote black people. That's not even scientific. That there's no way that could happen. There's no possible way because the forces who cause us all the problems on earth are the same forces that are responsible for the exploitation of the indigenous people, the exploitation of the Palestinian people, the exploitation of everybody on earth. And the only people that don't understand that, again, are people who are not engaged in the work. That's why we go so hard against people like Umar Johnson, for example. You cannot be a Pan-Africanist and be pro-capitalist. The capitalist system is built and maintained on exploiting African people. You cannot be a Pan-Africanist and be patriarchal, be for the exploitation and oppression of women, homophobic. You can't be any of that and be Pan-Africanist. A lot of you listen to these people and you like, well, they saying some good things. Look, even a broken ass clock is right twice a day. So we got to raise the bar higher than that. Okay. And there has to be criteria. And the criteria is that if you are for justice for African people, you have to be for justice for all of humanity. And if you're not for justice for African people. You're not for justice for anybody but yourself. You're trying to use rhetoric from the struggle to put money in your pocket. That's what you're trying to do. They might fool some of you with that. They are not fooling us. And we thank you for joining us today for this program. And we ask you to join us next week. If you don't know, November 2nd commemorates November 2nd, 1979. That's the day that our sister Assata Shakur was broken out of prison in New York State here in the United Snakes of America. So we're going to do a program. Of course, you know, our great sister left us physically on September 25th, almost a month ago. So the program next week is going to be dedicated to remembering Assata's day and her everlasting legacy. So you won't want to miss that one. It'll be a very good program. And the QR code in the upper left, the red and white one, you can get all of the AAPRP programs. You can go to the Forward Ever shop and buy clothes that support our work to build Pan-Africanism. Go to Hood Communist and an international Pan-African blog. You want to do that. And if you're in Sacramento, come to our community self-defense classes. I know some of you take self-defense, but you don't have a community self-defense class. You're just going somewhere where somebody's teaching you how to fight. We're trying to build a community conscious so that whenever fighting takes place, it takes place in a concept of us defending each other as communities. So come on out. We do political education, we do training, physical and mental training, you know, around you, giving you education and then training your body on how to defend yourself. So come out. It's every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. At 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 6 to 8 p.m. You don't need to register. You don't need to be all that nonsense. Just come out and participate. And if you don't want to do it, then tell some other people so that they can do it. And come on out. We have a lot of people that come. I'm not begging for people to come. We're just trying to build the community defense program. We need to build it everywhere that peace and justice loving people exist. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You go to www.aaprp-intl.org to do that. You can watch a video and you can see what the work study process that Shakura talked about is about in the AAPRP. We strongly invite you to do that. And the QR code in the bottom right, the black and white one, is for our APRP work in the Sahel region in Niger and Burkina Faso. Burkina books, it's Niger books as well. We want you to go ahead and scan that QR code and become a monthly sponsor. Give what you can. There's no limit, there's no amount. Give what you can, but it's about us buying books that we can provide, revolutionary books, Kwame Nkrumah books, Sekou Touré books, Amilcar Cabral books, Thomas Sankara, right? Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, Steve Biko. That's what we want. Assata Shakur. That's what we want our people at home. They don't have access to, but they can't just go, they can't just order from Marcus Books like you can. So that's the only way they can get them is through programs like this. So we will invite you to become a monthly sponsor so that we can begin to radicalize our people with political education. And then buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's unfortunately only available on Amazon, but the great news is that it's a great organizing book. I encourage you, if you have it already, form a book club and have other people get it. And call your local library and ask them to order it and put it in there. Do whatever you can to get the book out because 100% of the proceeds go towards anti-fascist work, right? Like we're doing a ton of work. The self-defense classes are a part of that. I have to buy materials for that. You really help when you buy the book or when you have people buy the book. So please do that. We thank you for joining us. We ask you to stay strong, stay encouraged. Come back next time. Tell people about all of these things. If you don't tell them, nobody else will. Forward ever. Enjoy the rest of your evening.